Hey guys, tonight we unearth something forgotten, something salt-soaked and wind-torn, buried in the hollow bones of an old lighthouse off the Scottish coast. The kind of place where the sea doesn't just crash, it waits, and it watches. You're standing on creaking wooden floors, sea spray in the air, and the walls seem to breathe when you're not looking. There's a logbook, faded ink, pages that stick, and what's inside? Well, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, post your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The lighthouse isn't on any modern map anymore. I found it on a maritime archive buried beneath a false name and coordinates offset by a few degrees. That was enough to draw me in, of course. You don't stumble onto a lighthouse that's been scrubbed from records without feeling like it wants to be found. The island was small, just a jagged claw of rock a few miles off the Hebrides. The sea chopped violently around it, like it resented the intrusion. My boat nearly capsized 3 times before I managed to reach land. It felt unwelcoming. No birds, no seals, just mist and cold. The lighthouse loomed above a tapering stone spine with rusted railings and windows like blind eyes. The door gave after 3 kicks. Inside, the air was dry, not musty. Dry like something had pulled all the moisture out decades ago. My boots crunched over shattered glass and peeled paint. Then I saw at a desk half buried under rotted oilskins and a broken lantern, and the logbook, bound in leather warped from age. But the pages were intact. The first entry is dated September 3rd, 1893. The penmanship is crisp, elegant, Navy issue probably. Whoever wrote this was methodical, almost cold in their tone. Arrived with full crew. Seas choppy. Supplies intact. No issues upon arrival. Weather calm. We'll maintain weekly entries unless conditions demand otherwise. Pretty dull stuff, right? But then, as I flipped ahead, only 5 pages in the tone shifts. The next entry feels rushed. Blotted ink. Scrawled margins. Something in the water last night. Sounded like singing. Clark swears it came from just beneath the rocks. No sightings. Spirits unsettled. Singing. From the sea. I read that sentence about 10 times. You ever get that feeling someone's breathing down your neck when you're alone? That's what it felt like then, even though the wind outside was dead. I should have stopped reading. But of course I didn't. Historical sidebar for a second. 1890s lighthouse keepers were usually part of the Northern Lighthouse Board, especially in Scotland. Isolated assignments were normal. 3-man rotations resupplied every 2 weeks by steamer. They weren't strangers to madness either. There's even a known syndrome, lighthouse madness. Claustrophobia meets cabin fever with a dash of seasickness and raw superstition. But this wasn't just madness. The entries after that grow darker, less formal, the handwriting more frantic. And weirdly, the dates begin to get inconsistent. Sometimes they skip a day. Sometimes the same date is listed twice, once calmly and again in panicked shorthand, almost like 2 versions of the same man were writing. One entry read, "Fog rolled in." Not natural. Couldn't see the lantern room from the kitchen. Sounded like something dragging across the roof. Checked nothing there. Clark won't speak, and then scribbled beneath that in a different hand. I saw the footprints, bare, wet, leading into the supply closet. Nothing inside. I stared at that page for a long time. Then I made the mistake of walking upstairs. Now lighthouses aren't built for comfort. Spiral stairs, iron bolts, cramped bunks. But this one, it felt warped. The higher I climbed, the tighter everything became, like the walls were shifting inward behind me. When I reached the top, I found the lamp housing shattered. Glass everywhere. Rusted gears. and a single chair facing out over the sea, bolted to the floor. There was a manacle on one armrest, not like a prisoner's shackle, more like a restraint, a way to keep someone in place no matter how hard they tried to leave. Why? What kind of job needed that kind of discipline? At this point, I'm still thinking maybe this is just a case of psychosis, that old sea madness doing its thing. But then I found something in the drawer beside the chair, a tiny seashell, blackened, burned almost, and beneath it, scratched into the drawer's wood, "Don't hum." It hears humming. You ever hear about the Selkie myths? They're sea spirits in Scottish folklore, seal creatures that can shed their skin and walk on land, usually portrayed as romantic or tragic, depending on the story. But there are older versions, darker ones, where the Selkie doesn't want love, it wants revenge. The next few pages of the log start to mention humming at night. Always the same melody, a low, droning lullaby that none of them can trace. And once someone hears it, they change. Stop eating, stop sleeping, just sit near the rocks and listen. Clark gone. Walked straight into the sea. Didn't flinch, didn't scream, just disappeared into the waves. No splash. I shut the log after reading that. It was too much. My head was pounding. I needed air. Outside, the mist had returned. Thick, unnatural. I walked a few paces toward the cliff, and that's when I heard it for the first time myself. A hum, soft, far below the rocks. My blood went cold. I'm not crazy. I know I heard it. I know I should have left right then. Just turned, marched back down the crumbling staircase, and made for the boat. Fog be damned. But curiosity is a disease, isn't it? One of the worst. The kind that wraps around your ribs like seaweed and whispers, "Just one more step, just one more page." So I went back inside, closed the heavy door behind me. It groaned like something exhaling. I returned to the logbook. The ink had bled a little more in the damp. The pages felt alive now, like skin. My fingers trembled, but I turned the page anyway. The next entry was short. December 5th, one lantern out. Hear the humming now, too. It's inside. Inside. The humming was inside now. You know what was happening in December 1893? Grover Cleveland had just started his second term as U.S. president. Meanwhile, the world was obsessed with Nikola Tesla's demonstrations of wireless energy. Electricity dancing through the air like magic. And in this tiny corner of the sea, a lighthouse keeper was scribbling his descent into something ancient, something wet. I kept reading. The entries blurred. Some were just single lines. "MacArthur is eating salt. The birds avoid us now." Woke up with sand in my mouth. There was one page that looked torn from a Bible. No, seriously, it was a page from a Gideon's jammed between the entries. Psalm 69 underlined over and over again. "Deliver me out of the mire and let me not sink." You'd think this was all just madness. But something in me said otherwise. I wasn't just reading delusions, I was reading a record. A slow, conscious record of a man watching the world twist, fold inward, and drown him inch by inch. And then came the entry I'll never forget. December 13th. Sea knocked. That's the word. It knocked, like a hand like knuckles against the foundation stones. I ran to the cellar. Nothing. But the knock came again, rhythmic, like a door being asked to open, not slammed. Asked, "Have you ever heard of the Dyatlov Pass incident? Whole group of experienced Soviet hikers found dead in the Ural Mountains in 1959. Tents ripped from the inside, no shoes, one woman missing her tongue, no clear cause. It's a historical mystery people love to link with the paranormal. But the lighthouse had something older than radiation, more patient than a Yeti." There was another scrawl sideways in the margin. "Don't open, don't answer, don't hum." I put the log down then and turned to the fireplace. Cold, long dead. But there were ashes there, recently stirred, which made no sense. The place had been sealed for decades, unless someone else had been here before me. There were boot prints in the dust, fresh ones, and not mine. I backed out of the room, heart pounding. The stairs behind me creaked again. Only this time I wasn't on them. My breath caught. I stared up into the shadows of the spiral. Nothing. Then the humming started again, but it wasn't outside anymore. It was behind me. I spun, shining my flashlight across the cracked walls. Nothing, just rot and rust. But the humming persisted. Low, human. Just a single note held too long. You know that unnatural sound your phone makes when it glitches and freezes. That digital whine. This was like that, but biological. I bolted up the stairs. Don't ask me why. Maybe it's that same human flaw, run toward the source instead of away. I just knew I had to get to the top again. Something was drawing me there. The lamp room hadn't changed, still shattered, still empty. But the air felt thick now, heavy with brine. My tongue tasted salt and blood, and then I saw something, far out beyond the mist, in the sea. Not a boat, not a seal. It was standing in the waves, a silhouette maybe 6 feet tall, unmoving. I blinked and it was gone. Another log entry whispered from memory. December 15th. One of them spoke. It mimicked Clark's voice. Begged me to open the cellar door, but Clark's been gone 4 days. You know what happened in December 1893 in real life. The crew of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse. 3 men vanished without a trace. Coats still hung, meals half-eaten, doors locked from the inside. The only clue, a final log entry ending with the sea, is restless. It is knocking. That story. It happened a few years after this one, which makes this feel like a precursor, like a warning no one took seriously. I went back down, flashlight trembling in my grip. Dust rose around me like mist. Every step I took echoed like gunfire. The cellar was ahead. I should have turned back, but I opened the door. The hinges squealed like an animal being dragged across the floor. I winced at the sound, but I kept going. I had to. The cellar door yawned open into pitch black, and the air that poured out was wrong. Cold, yes, but not natural cold. This was the kind of chill that clings to you, creeps under your clothes, behind your eyes. It smelled like wet stone, like decay, with a hint of something coppery, something like blood. I shone my flashlight down into the void. Stone steps disappeared into a tunnel of black. I told myself I wouldn't go further, that I'd just take a peek. But I had already crossed the threshold. 1 step then, another. The wood above me groaned. The lighthouse seemed to breathe. I kept walking. Halfway down, I saw scratches on the wall. Deep ones, not from tools. These were frantic, repetitive, human. A pattern formed, a loop of 5 tally marks over and over, counting something. Days, victims, sanity. You'd be surprised how often patterns like that show up in old, isolated locations. Ever hear of Eastern State Penitentiary? One of the first modern prisons opened in 1829. Inmates kept in solitary confinement for years. When it finally shut down, they found claw marks under the beds, circles scratched into stone, some so deep they'd cut through fingers. Same pattern. The cellar leveled out into a chamber, not much bigger than a closet, a broken cot, a chain on the wall, a Bible on the floor, pages scattered like dead birds, and the humming, louder now. It wasn't coming from one direction anymore. It was all around me, inside me. My flashlight flickered. That's when I saw the boot, just one, black and heavy, laced up tight, like the ones worn in the 1890s. It sat perfectly upright in the center of the room. No dust on it, no mold, like someone had just left it there. Then came the whisper. Not words, not exactly. More like breath on the back of my neck. I spun, nothing, and then laughter, childlike. just a single giggle echoing from the walls. My legs moved before my brain caught up. I backed up those stairs so fast I nearly fell. I slammed the cellar door shut and pressed my weight against it, and still I could hear it, the giggling. From inside, I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, pale, and something was under my nails. I scraped it out with my thumb and squinted. Sand, dry sand, from a sealed cellar with stone floors and no windows. Back in the logbook room, I found another page waiting for me. This one was different. It wasn't an entry. It was a sketch, done in ink, messy wild lines crisscrossing. But I could make it out. A shape vaguely human. Long limbs but too many joints. Head like a bloated fish with hollow circles for eyes and no mouth. At the bottom, someone had written, "It wears their faces." I didn't know what that meant then, but I would. Oh, I would. The next entry was dated December 18th. I saw Clark again. He was standing in the rain, no coat, smiling. When I opened the door, he ran, his arms bent wrong, like he didn't know how to use them. My mouth went dry. I had seen the same thing in the waves, a figure standing still, wrong proportions. And just then I remembered something. When I first arrived at the lighthouse, I'd passed an old oil drum near the edge of the cliff. I didn't think much of it, just rusted metal partially buried in rock and lichen. But now I wondered if it had been something else. So I went back outside, fog still thick, the wind cutting sharp now. I followed the path, boots crunching over gravel. The cliff edge loomed close. Waves crashed far below, but the sound was wrong, muted, like someone playing a recording from behind a wall. I found the drum again, but it wasn't a drum. It was a well, a shallow one capped with a rusted grate. Bolted down, the stone around it was scorched, burned as if someone had tried to set the earth on fire to seal it. I knelt, put my ear to the metal, and I swear to you I heard breathing. Not wind, breathing. Then something bumped the grate from below. Once, twice, rhythmic, knocking. I stumbled back, heart galloping, breath hitching. You ever hear of the Bell Witch, early 1800s Tennessee? Family tormented by a presence that knocked on walls, spoke in voices, even claimed to have poisoned the father. It started with tapping, just like this. One knock, then two, then a rhythm. Sound familiar? I didn't stay long by the well. Something about it made my teeth itch. Back inside, I noticed something new. The logbook had moved. It was now open to a page I hadn't seen before. The date was smeared, but the writing was clear. The sea is not just sea. It speaks. It remembers. The ink trailed off like the pen had been yanked away mid-sentence. I flipped ahead. The last page was blank. Just 3 words written in blood-red ink. The sea knocks. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the lighthouse keeper's cot blanket, pulled to my chest, eyes fixed on the door. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Every whisper of the wind morphed into breath in my ear. I tried to convince myself it was just the isolation getting to me. A little cabin fever, right? But even then I knew better. You can rationalize creaks. You can't explain the knocking. It started again around 3:00 a.m. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate, from beneath the floorboards. I sat up holding my breath like it might stop whatever was down there from hearing me. The sound came again, this time closer. The cellar. It had to be the cellar. But I had locked that door. I had pressed a chair against it. I'd stacked an entire trunk on top. And still knock, knock, knock. I must have looked ridiculous creeping across the room in my socks, armed with a rusty lantern and a hammer I found in the kitchen drawer. I didn't want to go down there. But something in me needed to know if that door was still shut. It wasn't. The trunk was tipped over, the chair broken, and the door wide open. The cellar yawned before me like a mouth missing all its teeth. There's a story I remember reading about the Flannan Isles. 1900. 3 lighthouse keepers vanished without a trace. The logbook entries in their final days included notes about a storm that hadn't happened, strange noises, and a presence outside the tower. The last entry read, "The storm is over. Sea calm. God is over all. They were never seen again. Some believe madness, others murder. But a few say the sea itself took them. I believe that now. I took one step down, and the cellar stairs. They were wet, not damp, soaked, dripping. But I hadn't heard rain all night. The lantern flickered. The air was thicker now, like trying to breathe through a sponge. My skin crawled not from cold, but from the sensation of being watched by something with too many eyes and no face at all. Halfway down, the humming returned. Only now it was layered. Voices. Dozens of them. Some whispered. Some sobbed. One even laughed. But they all repeated the same phrase in overlapping tones. The sea is knocking. I ran, tripped up the stairs, smacked into the wall, stubbed my toe so hard I saw stars, but I didn't stop. I slammed the door this time, nailing it shut with every rusted nail I could find. Then I climbed the tower. I needed height, distance. The top of the lighthouse gave me a 360-degree view of nothing but fog and waves. The sea stretched into gray nothingness, and yet it felt close. Like the water wanted something, like it was calling me by name. I stared down at the rocks far below, where the waves slapped against the cliff face like angry palms. And for a moment, I swear, I saw a figure in the water. It wasn't swimming. It was standing, shoulders just above the surface, still as a statue, watching. No boat, no platform, just there. I ran back down the stairs. I needed to leave. Screw the contract, screw the money. My sanity had a price, and I had just found it. But when I got to the front door, it wouldn't open. Not stuck, locked. From the outside. You ever hear of the Dyatlov Pass incident, 1959? A group of hikers found dead in the Russian mountains. Tents ripped open from the inside. Bodies scattered, half-dressed, some with crushed bones and no external wounds. One woman had her tongue missing. Official explanations ranged from avalanche to hypothermia. But the weirdest part, radiation on the clothes. As if something unnatural had touched them. That door felt the same, radiated. Tingling heat under my fingertips that made my skin twitch. I was trapped, with whatever had climbed out of that well. I backed away and noticed something odd. The air smelled like salt. That made no sense. The sea was 100 feet down, and the fog should have muted any scent. But the salt was thick now, metallic, like blood mixed with brine. Then I heard it again, knocking, only this time from the window. Second floor. Something was outside, knocking, on the glass. I tiptoed toward the staircase, dread slowing every movement. As I crept toward the window, I saw the condensation on the glass ripple. Not from inside, from breath on the other side. I took another step, then a hand smacked against the window. Gray-skinned, webbed fingers, and pressed against the glass like it was testing the barrier between us. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just stared as the thing outside cocked its head like a curious dog. Its eyes weren't eyes, just hollow spaces that absorbed light. And it was smiling, but it didn't have a mouth. Not a real one. Just a slit that opened sideways, peeling back like a fish gill. And inside more teeth than should ever fit in something so small. Then it was gone. Just blinked out. I stumbled backward, tripped over the rug, and hit my head on the desk. Stars swam behind my eyelids, but I kept consciousness. I had to, because I saw something else then. The logbook. It had flipped to a new page. There were more entries, ones that weren't there before, ones with today's date, and my name at the top. My name, written in ink that hadn't dried yet. The page read like a diary I had no memory of writing. Line after line of jagged, looping cursive, each stroke filled with urgency. The first sentence stabbed straight into my ribs. The knocking started again last night, louder this time. I didn't write that. I didn't. But there it was in handwriting that mimicked mine too perfectly to dismiss. I turned the page. More entries. All with today's date. And the next after that. They bled into tomorrow, predicting things I hadn't yet done, but felt inevitable now. Tried the radio. Static. C still watching. Don't open the cellar again. It knows I'm alone. Then finally, soon I'll knock too. I dropped the logbook and backed away like it had teeth. My heel bumped against the cot. I had to get out. Not just leave the lighthouse, but get out of whatever loop this was. Or trap, or curse, or time slip. I didn't know, but I knew it was old. Older than the stones in the walls. Older than any map. You know how in Norse mythology there's a serpent named Jormungandr that wraps around the world biting its own tail. They say when it releases its bite, the world will end. But imagine if it wasn't biting its tail. Imagine if it was knocking. I stumbled toward the tiny transmitter in the corner, an old Navy-issue radio that groaned to life with a twist of its cracked dial. Static. Then a voice. Faint. Warbled. Lighthouse 3. Come in. Do you read? I smashed the button. This is Lighthouse 7, repeat. This is Lighthouse 7, I'm trapped. Something is outside. It's not human. It's not real, the voice crackled back. I froze. What did you say? Nothing outside. You're alone. You've always been alone. The voice was mine. The blood in my legs went cold. I dropped the receiver and watched it swing the cord, creaking like a noose in an old gallows tale. Then downstairs a sound I'll never forget. Laughter, coming from the cellar door. But it wasn't just one voice anymore. It was mine, and his, and others, dozens of them, all laughing in harmony, the kind of laughter you'd hear in a padded room after lights out. You ever read about the Mary Celeste ship found drifting in the Atlantic in 1872? Entire crew vanished, no signs of struggle, no lifeboats missing. Just a meal half-eaten on the captain's table. Some believe mutiny, others blame pirates. But the weirdest theory, that they simply stepped off the ship into thin air, called by something from the sea. I believe that now too. My body moved before my brain gave permission. I grabbed the lantern and ran upstairs again. If I couldn't get out the door, maybe the beacon room had a signal flare, a rope, anything. But when I got to the top, the hatch was sealed, bolted shut from the outside, and drawn on the trap door in what looked like rust or something worse was a symbol I didn't recognize. A perfect circle surrounded by 7 claw marks. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. Instead, I collapsed onto the floor, back pressed to the wall, staring out of the window. The figure was still in the sea, and now there were 3, shoulder to shoulder, watching. And I realized with a sudden flash of dread, they were closer than before, just beyond the rocks now, standing on nothing. That's when I started to hear the scraping. Inside the walls. Not rats, not age, not shifting wood. Claws. Wet claws dragging through the inner frame of the lighthouse, tracing circles in the stone. They were inside. The radio buzzed again, but now it whispered in a language I couldn't understand. Guttural. Bubbling. Like something spoken underwater and forced through a drain pipe. But my name was in it. Over and over again. Clear as day. I know you, it said, voice choking like it had gills. I remember your skin. I laughed then. Not out of humor. Out of the sheer break of my mind cracking under the pressure. Who even writes that in a horror story? I remember your skin. Come on. That's messed up even by demon standards. I tried to ground myself. Breathe. Focus on something, anything normal. So I started reading the lighthouse inventory log. Just a list. Supplies, rations, salted pork, kerosene, 3 coils rope. I thought if I read enough normal things, reality would settle back in. But halfway down the log changed. Salted pork, kerosene, 3 coils rope, 1 soul trapped. What? I reread it, rubbed my eyes, blinked hard. Same thing. 1 soul trapped. Then below that, 2 souls knocking. The log updated itself. And that's when I realized the truth. I wasn't in a lighthouse. Not anymore. I was in the logbook. The structure was still real. The fog, the sea, the gnashing shapes beneath the waves. But whatever this place was, it had rules, rituals. And once you become part of the story, you don't get to leave until someone else reads you in. And I'd read the book, cover to cursed cover. And now I was the entry. Somewhere below the cellar door slammed shut on its own. Above me, the beacon's bulb flickered red, then out. In the darkness, the whispers returned, but now they were inside my skull. I curled into myself on the floor, hands over my ears, eyes clenched shut, trying to shut the voices out. But they didn't need ears. They weren't sounds anymore, not really. More like vibrations inside my bones. Like when a lightning bolt hits too close and you feel the thunder before you hear it. The whispers had names, and those names were mine. All mine. But different. Twisted. I don't know how else to explain it, except they were versions of me that had stayed here too long. I remembered reading somewhere about the first lightships, before lighthouses became permanent buildings. They were floating beacons anchored offshore, often crewed by just 2 men who rotated shifts. But in 1891, the crew of lightship number 68 vanished. No sign of a struggle. Lanterns lit. Logbook ended mid-sentence. Last words. It walks at dusk. I believe that now. I really do. There was no dusk inside this tower. Just an endless blend of fog-stained daylight and suffocating night. But I noticed something strange as I paced. My shadow didn't always move when I did. I'd take a step. It would wait. I'd turn around. It would turn slower, like it was learning. That's when I knew I wasn't the only one inside my skin. You ever hear about Tulpa's thought forms? Beliefs made flesh through repetition and fear. Some ancient Tibetan monks claimed they could create sentient entities by sheer mental focus. But the problem is, once you create one, it can grow and change. Maybe this place, this lighthouse, it doesn't just house people. It copies them. Over time. Like mildew on bread. Like mold in a dark room. You think you're still yourself until one day the voice in your head stops sounding like you. Mine already had. I kept the logbook in hand now because every few hours or minutes, time was jelly here, new entries would appear. Predictions, warnings, sometimes commands. Do not look in the mirror. I lasted 3 hours before I did. The glass in the washroom was old, fogged at the edges, warped with years of salt and weather. I thought maybe I could shave, feel normal, get some grip on reality. But the man in the mirror blinked before I did, and his smile was too wide. That's when I shattered it. First with my fist, then with the lantern base. Shards fell everywhere and one lodged in my palm. The pain felt real. Good. Anchoring. You ever wonder what pain really means when you're not sure if you're real anymore? I bandaged my hand with a strip of curtain and found myself back in the kitchen, except it wasn't the kitchen anymore. It was filled with furniture I didn't recognize. A rocking chair, a phonograph that played nothing but static, a child's drawing pinned to the wall, crude stick figures, one labeled me, the other Dad, and the third just a black scribble with sharp angles for limbs. The caption read, "The sea is my friend." Nope, absolutely not. I flipped open the logbook again. New page, new date. A week in the future. Do not feed it after midnight. Feed what? There was no answer. But from downstairs I heard chewing, like wet lips on bone. Back when the Statue of Liberty arrived in New York in 1885, the people of the city were so fascinated by the sheer impossibility of the structure that they turned her torch into a temporary viewing platform. You could pay a few cents to climb inside. Look out, see the harbor from her eyes. I think of that sometimes now. Being inside something bigger than yourself. Something built to protect, but also capable of trapping. The lighthouse had become that. A monument, a prison. I started marking days on the wall in chalk. 5 tallies, then a crossbar. But every morning they'd be erased, not smudged, wiped clean. Like the place refused to acknowledge the passage of time. I found photos next, old ones. Hidden behind the baseboards in the bedroom upstairs. 3 men. One I recognized from the painting, the missing keeper. The others were strangers. One tall, gaunt. The other squat with eyes too close together. On the back of the photo, only one walks out. Below that, and only after the knocking stops, I checked the cellar door again. It was open. Not cracked, not ajar, wide open. The stairs led down into blackness, a depth that didn't match the scale of the building. You ever seen those videos where people dive into underwater caves that just keep going forever? It felt like that. A vertical ocean in the floor. I closed the door, then it knocked. Once, twice, 3 times. The rhythm of a human hand. But I knew better. I stayed upstairs that night listening. The walls breathing. The light spinning out over an ocean that had stopped making waves. And the figures outside, now there were 4. They didn't blink, didn't move, didn't need to. They were waiting. I didn't sleep that night, not really. Just dozed, sitting up back, pressed against the kitchen wall with my eyes wide open, and a rusted fire poker clutched in my good hand. Every few minutes I swore I heard the cellar door creak, but when I looked, still closed, still chained. Except here's the kicker, I hadn't chained it. That's when I started wondering if the lighthouse was helping me, or keeping me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had locked it and forgotten. Maybe I was just exhausted. But deep down I felt it. The place was learning me, like a parasite figuring out how to mimic its host. In 1896, Nikola Tesla claimed he could transmit electricity wirelessly, his Wardenclyffe Tower rising like some alien spire on Long Island. A feat of engineering, yes. But people were terrified. They thought the sky would catch fire or birds would fall dead from the air. Technology misunderstood becomes fear, and fear, when fed, becomes belief. Just like this lighthouse, and belief here its fuel. I thought about the shadow that moved slower than me, the whispers that didn't stop when I screamed, the growing gaps in my memory. And the clock, oh God, the clock. It no longer ticked in seconds, it breathed. Each swing of the pendulum sounded like a drawn-out inhale, each chime a rasping cough. I took it off the wall and smashed it. The time didn't stop. I retreated to the lantern room. Top floor, surrounded by glass. At least there I could see the water, watch the beams sweep out over the sea like a blind eye. But even that betrayed me, because in one sweep, I saw something standing on the water. It wasn't a boat, wasn't a trick of light. It was tall, impossibly thin, dressed in what looked like a lighthouse keeper's coat, but the face beneath the cap was a blur, like it didn't want to be seen properly. When the light swung back, it was gone. I didn't scream, I just sat, staring. The next morning, the logbook had another fresh entry. Different handwriting now. You saw him, don't look again. Too late. And now every time I blink, I see that blur burned onto my vision, like an afterimage. I tried to leave. It was sunny. Clear sky, perfectly calm water. The boat was still tied up at the dock, rocking gently. I loaded a few things into a canvas bag, my journal, the lantern, the rusted poker for company not defense, and I stepped out. Got halfway down the rocky path when I realized the horizon wasn't moving. That's not something you normally notice, right? The ocean always breathes, always shifts. But here, still, dead still. Not a ripple, like a painting. I blinked, looked again. The ocean was upside down. Clouds below me, waves above. I turned and ran. Back inside. Slamming the door behind me so hard it knocked a picture frame off the wall. The photo again, the 3 men. Except this time, the tall one's eyes were burned out. Just 2 blackened holes where his gaze had once been. I checked my own eyes in the window pane. Still there. Still me, for now. In 1899, a lighthouse off the coast of Newfoundland reported seeing a ghost ship. Multiple crew logged it in their journals, a schooner aflame but never sinking. It circled the island twice, then vanished. Sometimes I wonder if this whole structure is a ghost ship, a dead place still moving, carrying pieces of people across time until it finds the next one to collect. Down in the supply room, I found something I hadn't noticed before. A hatch in the floor, smaller than the cellar, hidden beneath a rug that hadn't been moved in decades, judging by the dust ring. I opened it. Inside, a journal. Old, leather-wrapped, pages curled with damp. Not the Lighthouse logbook, someone's personal notes. First entry, I've been here 12 days. The others are gone. The name signed at the bottom, mine. I sat there for a long time, longer than I should have. Reading entries I hadn't written, but somehow had. They detailed everything. The cellar, the shadows, the blurred man on the sea, and one line that made my stomach knot. If you're reading this, it's already chosen you. I tossed the journal into the stove and burned it. Watched it curl and blacken and vanish. Didn't help. Later, as the fog rolled in thicker than ever, I heard a new sound. A soft creaking. Rope, wood, sails. I climbed the stairs too fast, slammed my shin. Didn't care. Reached the lantern room. Looked out. A ship. Real this time. Or at least it looked real. Lanterns glowing. Men moving on deck. I lit a flare. Waved it like a madman. No reaction. Then I saw the name on the bow. Scratched in fading white paint, Annie's End. And I knew that name. I'd seen it before. In the burned journal. That ship had gone down in 1884. No survivors. Except now, it was back. And it was heading for the lighthouse. I didn't go back down the stairs. I couldn't. My legs wouldn't cooperate. Not while that ship moved silently toward shore. Its sails full despite the windless sky. The Annie's End cut through the water, like it remembered how to die, but not how to float too smooth, too steady. No rocking, no churn, just motion. I gripped the window frame, watching as the vessel glided closer. No anchor dropped, no voices carried. And then its lights winked out. One blink, pitch black, gone. But I knew better. The lantern room went cold. Not cold like a breeze, not the kind of cold that makes you shiver and pull your sleeves down. This was the wet cold, the type that slides behind your ribs and settles in your spine. Like you've already been submerged and no one told you. I didn't realize I'd started backing away until my shoulder hit the lens. I turned. Behind the Fresnel glass on the inside, something had pressed a handprint. Fingers too long, spread wide. Palm burned with soot, not on the glass, inside it. Then came the sound. The voice. It didn't come from the stairwell or through the walls, it rose out of the floorboards. It said, "We have always been." I ran, nearly pitched down the spiral stairs. Slipped once, caught myself on the railing, kept going until I reached the mid-level watchroom and slammed the trapdoor shut behind me. I curled into a corner and waited. In 1893, the Scottish island of Hirta recorded what they called the Silent Week. An entire 7 days without a single bird call wave or gust. The islanders kept journals describing the quiet as suffocating as though nature held its breath. On the 8th day, a landslide took out 3 homes. They believed the silence had been a warning. I understand that now. Silence is not absence. It's anticipation. At some point I must have passed out because when I opened my eyes it was morning. Sunlight bled weakly through the dust-smeared windows. I crept downstairs and opened the front door, slowly expecting what the Annie's End anchored in the cove. A line of sailors with blurred faces waiting for me. Nothing. Just rocks, seaweed, gull tracks in the wet sand. Still, I didn't breathe easy, because the lighthouse felt different, heavier, like the air had thickened. I made a plan. Leave. For real this time. No half measures, no staring at upside-down horizons or talking myself out of what I'd seen. I didn't care if the ocean showed me clouds underwater or blood in the tide. I had to try. I packed again. Less this time. Only the flare gun, my journal, a pocket knife, and the lantern. Left the poker. Felt too much like a joke now. The boat rocked gently at the dock. I stepped in. Rowed. 20 feet from shore, I turned to look back. All the windows of the lighthouse were glowing red. Every single one. Like eyes. And standing in the lantern room, clear as day, was me. No motion, no waving. Just watching. Still. Patient. Wearing the same jacket, same torn shirt, same exhausted face. But the eyes, gone. 2 burned pits just like the photo. I rowed harder. For the first time since arriving, the sea fought back. Waves churned against the boat. Not massive, not enough to capsize, but deliberate, like hands shoving me backward. I screamed at the water. "I am not staying." The reply came like a whisper in my skull. "You already have." I don't remember capsizing. I just woke up soaked and coughing on the rocks. Clothes ripped, knees bleeding, boat splintered nearby. Tide receding like it was satisfied, like it had made its point. I limped back up the path, opened the door, and there on the wall inside the foyer was the photo again. The 3 men. Except now, there were 4, and the newest one looked just like me. I punched it. Glass shattered. Blood on my knuckles. The photo stayed. Later that evening, as I lit the lantern, I noticed something written on the underside of the desk in the watchroom. I had to crawl under to read it. 6 words etched deep into the wood grain. "The sea is knocking." Don't answer. Too late. I'd already heard it. That rhythmic sound. Not waves, not wind. Knocking. 3 slow raps on the cellar door. Pause. Then again. Always 3. In 1892, a ship called the Seahawk docked in Boston with a dead man chained below deck. The crew claimed he'd murdered someone, but the autopsy revealed a different truth: he'd starved. Chained inside a compartment too small for movement. No one ever found the keys. And carved into the hull above where he'd been held were those same words: "The sea is knocking." I wondered if that man ever tried to leave something behind. A sign, a message. And I realized that's what I'd become now. Not the final witness, but the next author. I took the Lighthouse logbook, found a fresh page, dated it, picked up the pen, and I wrote, 3 men disappeared in 1890. I think I've joined them. The sea is knocking. The sea is always knocking. Then I set the pen down, and from the top of the stairs, something whispered, "Welcome home." I didn't sleep that night. Didn't even try. I sat in the middle of the kitchen floor with my back against the wall, knees up, flare gun across my lap, and a lamp flickering like it had a pulse problem. My heartbeat matched it beat for beat. Steady until it wasn't. Every creak in the woods sounded like footsteps overhead. Every gust of wind groaned through the stone walls like a voice half swallowed. I tried plugging my ears at one point. Didn't help. The sound wasn't in the air anymore. It was in me. And the cellar door, it knocked. Again. Always 3 times. Never rushed, never angry. Just patient. Like whoever, whatever was down there knew I was running out of time and out of sanity. It could wait. The worst part, the sound started moving. By midnight, the knocks were coming from inside the wall behind the fireplace. Then from behind the pantry. Then under the floor. Like something mapping the perimeter of my mind, tapping its way around checking for cracks. I found the old keeper's logs in a locked drawer beneath the desk. Used the poker to break the drawer open. Inside were 5 notebooks. Only one had a name on it, M. Fairchild. The others had no covers, just stitched paper yellowed and soft as moth wings. Fairchild's log was neat, organized, cold. He'd kept records of oil usage, weather ship sightings. But toward the end of the entries, the tone changed. Phrases like "man on the rocks again" and "lens turned inward today" started showing up. And in the final entry he'd written, "The light isn't meant for ships anymore. It's watching me now." Underneath scrawled sideways "whistle when you pass the mirror," just in case. I stared at that line for a long time, because I hadn't noticed the mirror until then. It was in the hallway waist high, set into the wall, between the kitchen and the stairwell. Framed in blackened brass. Oval-shaped, warped like glass that had sagged under its own memory. And when I passed it slowly, I didn't whistle. I watched. I wish I hadn't. My reflection stood still. Too still. Even when I tilted my head, slightly raised an eyebrow, the man in the glass didn't follow. Just stared straight ahead. Then in a blink, he smiled. A slow, deliberate, "I know you're watching" smile. I backed away. Didn't take my eyes off it. eventually turned and ran upstairs, slammed the trapdoor shut behind me, curled up next to the lens. That's when I remembered the second part of the Fairchild entry. The light isn't meant for ships anymore. That line kept crawling around my brain like a centipede. What does it mean for a light to turn inward? Not metaphorically, but literally. I lit the beacon that night anyway, out of habit, out of fear, or maybe because it felt like a prayer, some desperate attempt to let someone know I was still alive, still in here. But when the lens turned, the light didn't sweep the sea. It swept the hallway. I could see the glow moving across the walls below, sliding over the mirror, flooding the stairs, shining not out, but down, like it was searching for something inside the lighthouse, or someone. In 1890, a lesser-known maritime superstition circulated among European seafarers. It claimed that if a lighthouse's light ever swept inward, it meant the sea had claimed the land itself. The phrase used was, "when stone learns to breathe salt." Most dismissed it as poetic nonsense until an entire outpost vanished from Sark Island that same year. Vanished. No signs of struggle. No damage to the structures. Just gone. I believe them now. I tried boarding up the mirror. Hammered a plank over it using a broken chair leg and some rusty nails from the basement hatch. Didn't matter. A few hours later, the mirror was clean again, untouched, as if the plank had never existed, except it had, because the plank was now nailed to the ceiling of the bedroom. Same wood, same crooked nails, like the house was rearranging itself, messing with me, playing. The next knock came from inside the desk. 3 raps, soft, then silence. I opened it slowly, heart rattling in my chest, like a bird in a jar. Inside was a single item I hadn't placed there, a pocket watch. I picked it up. No time on the face. Just a reflection. My reflection. But it blinked. Twice. No hands. No numbers. Just the mirrored inside of a watch, and a version of me that moved independently. I threw it into the fireplace. It didn't break. Just lay there glowing faintly until the flames died out all at once. The cold returned, and from the walls the whisper came again, soft and sweet as decay. "You wrote the ending already. You just haven't read it yet." I crawled back upstairs and reopened the logbook. Flipped to the last page I'd written on. There was more now. Lines I didn't remember writing. I returned the key to the sea. She asked for blood, so I gave her mine. "Tell the next one I'm sorry." That last part hit like a gut punch, because the pen was still moving, and it wasn't in my hand. I didn't scream. Not because I was brave God, no, but because I didn't want whatever was moving the pen to know that I'd seen it, that I was watching it. The pen scratched softly against the paper. Each stroke felt deliberate, like it wasn't just writing, it was remembering. I slid back, knees crunching against the floorboards until my spine hit the brass rail behind me. I stared at the pen until it stopped. The ink pooled at the period like blood at the edge of a wound. The entry now read, "The mirror doesn't show you, it shows what you leave behind." Then the page turned by itself. No breeze, just a soft whisper of parchment as the book flipped open to the next blank sheet, daring me to look, daring me to read more. I didn't. I shut the damn thing and shoved it under my coat like that might contain it. Like hiding it could undo what it had written. That's when I heard the voice again. Low, wet. Not through the walls this time, but from the lens itself. A gargling, dragging croon you've been seen. I stood up too fast, hit my head on the upper railing. Stars burst in my vision, and when they cleared, the room wasn't empty anymore. There was a figure by the lamp, not moving, not there exactly, but like a shadow that had wandered away from someone and was too tired to return. Tall, narrow, barely darker than the space around it. But its eyes, if you could call them that, burned faint and reddish orange like old embers buried in sand. I blinked and it was gone, but the light now spun faster. Faster! The lens whined metal groaning against itself as the mechanism wound beyond its limit. The beam swept around in short, jerky spasms. I could feel the tower shaking under my boots as if it were trying to shake me loose. I clambered down the ladder before it snapped. The lighthouse hummed as I descended. I don't mean some mechanical vibration. I mean it was humming. A low, droning note as if the stone walls had found their voice and were now testing it note by note. Trying to match my frequency. It worked. By the time I got to the kitchen, my bones were rattling in sync with the sound. I opened every drawer, every cabinet. I needed something sharp, something solid, something normal. I found an old kitchen knife with a curved blade and a chipped handle. That was when I noticed something strange about the pantry door. It was open, only it didn't lead to the pantry anymore. It led to the sea. Not the actual sea. No crashing waves, no smell of salt or rot, but an image. A perfect, silent, windless ocean stretching into darkness, painted across the doorway like some cosmic backdrop. And right at the edge of it, on a rocky spit, barely wider than my shoulders, stood me. But not me now. This version wore the old keeper's coat, his boots, his crooked smile. He raised a hand, not a wave, a beckoning, and then the voice again, now behind me. You came to tend the light. I turned. Nobody, just my reflection in the window glass, though, twisted at the edges, like it had melted into the frame. I could still see the other me through the pantry door, standing motionless on that rocky spit. The history books will tell you that lighthouses in the 1890s were marvels of engineering, that the lens, usually a Fresnel, was so precisely cut it could throw a beam 20 miles out to sea. But what they don't mention is how often keepers reported seeing themselves in the beam. Not reflections, not shadows, duplicates. One tale from the coast of Orkney describes a man who claimed he saw his double in the tower across the water. When he went to investigate, he found the tower empty, except for a note on the wall reading, "Thank you for switching shifts." I believe him too. Back in my lighthouse, I shut the pantry door. It didn't close, because there was no longer a door to shut, just that black sea, and the figure of myself, now closer, on my side of the threshold. I lunged forward and grabbed the frame, slammed my shoulder into it until the image rippled like pushing against fabric. One final shove and the sea disappeared. Just shelves, just dust, just the pantry again. I stepped back, right onto the trapdoor, which opened. Didn't break, didn't creak, just opened like it was expecting me. I fell, only a few feet, landed hard in the dark, sending a cloud of mildew and rot into the air. The trapdoor slammed shut above me. I stood, leg shaky, knife still in hand. That's when I noticed the door at the far end of the cellar. A door I swore wasn't there before. Iron, bolted, covered in markings I couldn't place. Not runes, not letters, just scratches like something inside had spent years clawing its story onto the walls. I walked to it. The knocking started again. 3 soft taps, but this time from behind me. I turned and saw the cellar mirror. I hadn't even noticed it before. Smaller than the hallway one. Oval again. Black brass frame. Set into the wall like a window into something deeper than the building's foundations. I raised the knife. Then I saw what was inside it. It wasn't me. It was the version of me from the pantry. Closer now, mouth moving. I leaned in to hear, though every muscle screamed not to. He whispered, "You're late for your shift." I staggered back, heart hammering in my chest, and nearly tripped over the floorboards. My reflection in the mirror never moved, though the thing in it, the other me, did. Slowly, it raised a hand pointing at me through the glass. The motion was almost robotic, deliberate, like it had been rehearsed 100 times. My breath caught in my throat as I backed away, eyes never leaving the figure. But that's when I noticed the most chilling thing of all. The mirror didn't reflect the dim light of the cellar. No, it reflected the lighthouse bathed in the blinding light of the beam. I blinked, and in that brief moment, the figure stepped out of the mirror. It didn't walk. It was more like it shifted, like the very space around it bent and folded, pulling the figure out of the frame and into the room with me. I could feel the air grow heavier, colder, as though the walls themselves were recoiling from what was coming into the space. I didn't think. I didn't have time. I just ran, knife still gripped in my hand, not knowing what I hoped to do with it. What could I possibly do with it? I burst out of the cellar, but as I hit the narrow hallway, the lights flickered. Every bulb in the lighthouse buzzed, dimmed, and then nothing. Total darkness. The thundering pulse of my own heartbeat drowned out everything. The lighthouse felt alive in a way that didn't make sense. The walls creaked as if they were closing in, and every corner seemed to harbor shadows that didn't belong. I felt like I was being hunted by something that had no shape, just the cold, oppressive weight of its presence. The air tasted sour metallic like blood. The door to the spiral staircase was just ahead, and I moved toward it blindly, my hands shaking. I didn't want to look back, but I could hear it. The knock, soft at first, then louder. One knock for every step I took, echoing through the hollow stone. I reached the stairs, but the moment I stepped onto the first rung, a scream my own ripped from my throat as the lights returned. In a flash, I saw it. A hand, cold and skeletal, had reached up from the bottom of the staircase. It had grabbed the edge of the stone, dragging itself upward, fingers elongated and bent at unnatural angles. I fought the instinct to run, my mind screaming at me to get to the top, but my body didn't listen. My feet were heavy, my legs slow. The staircase twisted around me, a dark spiral that seemed to stretch on forever. I gripped the railing harder, knuckles white every step, feeling like it took an eternity. By the time I reached the top, I could hear it breathing behind me. The trapdoor above was open. I froze for a moment, staring up into the brilliant white beam, the lens glowing like a monstrous eye. It was flashing erratic, as though it had been disturbed by someone that shouldn't be there. But the figure in the mirror was with me now. It was standing right behind me, just beyond the edge of the light. It spoke. The voice, as dry as dust, rasped in my ear. The sea is knocking. The door to the lantern room creaked as it swung open. I could see it. The sea. Not the ocean outside, but something else. It swirled violently, its black surface reflecting the light of the lens. It was alive the way it moved, in slow, undulating motions, like a beast stirring beneath the surface. The mirror had come alive, no longer a reflection, but a portal. A passage. Before I could step back, I felt the presence of the figure behind me. Its fingers brushed my shoulder cold, like the touch of death itself. The moment it made contact, the entire lighthouse shook violently, throwing me off balance. I stumbled forward and landed on the cold metal of the lantern room floor. The sea was inside the lighthouse now. I could feel the wetness creeping around the edges of the room. A heavy mist, thick with salt, and the scent of something rotting. It clung to my skin, to the walls, to the air itself. As I looked up, I saw the lens spinning faster, as if the light was searching, looking for something or someone. Then, with a sudden whoosh, the sea broke through the door, crashing into the room with a deafening roar. I screamed. The water was like ice, flooding the room in seconds, dragging me with it. My feet were swept out from under me, and I found myself tossed around in the current, choking on the salt water. I gasped for air, clawing at anything I could reach, but the pressure of the water was unbearable. I could barely see. My head throbbed. My lungs burned, and then just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I felt something else. A hand, cold, slick with water, but not a human hand. It was the other me. It pulled me deeper, and I knew then the sea was knocking. I didn't know how much time passed. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer in the lantern room. The water had receded, leaving only the remnants of its touch, a damp, musty smell that clung to the walls. I was lying on the stone floor of the lighthouse, gasping, shivering from the cold. But when I looked up, I saw the figure. It stood in the doorway, no longer a shadow, but a real man, or something that looked like one. It wasn't me anymore. The figure smiled, the same crooked, unsettling smile I had seen in the mirror. "You've arrived," it said, its voice low and final. "The light is yours now." The words echoed through the empty lighthouse as I tried to move, but my limbs were like stone. The cold was seeping into my bones, more than just physical, something deeper. As if the very essence of the place had claimed me. The figure, no, it wasn't me. Not anymore, stepped forward, its feet making no sound against the cold stone floor. It was like the air around it thickened, every motion purposeful, deliberate. A nightmare manifest. You don't understand yet, do you? The figure spoke again, the voice now, an almost affectionate murmur. The sea never lets go. It calls, pulls, swallows. It doesn't matter if you want it or not. It's been waiting for you. I tried to respond, but no words came. My throat was too tight, my body refusing to move. The only thing I could do was stare at the figure, the thing that wore my face, but wasn't me, standing just beyond the threshold of the lantern room. The beam above the same one that had once lit the coast now seemed like an indifferent watcher. Its bright light cut through the shadows, casting everything in sharp contrast. Everything except the figure, which stood untouched by the light, its presence casting its own shadow that stretched unnaturally far across the floor. You weren't supposed to come back, it continued, and I noticed the shift in its voice. It wasn't mocking now. There was something else, something akin to pity. But once the sea calls you, it doesn't matter if you're prepared. You came for the light, but you'll leave with the dark. A cold laugh rippled through the room, a laugh I recognized. It was my own, but warped like an echo from a far-off place, somewhere beyond time. I struggled to lift my hand to grasp anything that could save me from this nightmare, but the weight in the air was too much. It felt like the walls themselves were pulling me in, drawing me closer to the cold, empty darkness of the lantern room. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind screamed to wake up, but it was no use. The water had come back, not from the sea, not from outside the lighthouse, but from within, as if the very foundation of the tower was now connected to that endless shifting tide. The floorboards cracked beneath me, and before I could stop it, my hand reached out for the water, drawn as if by instinct. The coldness enveloped me, curling around my wrist and arm like the embrace of an ancient, patient force. The figure, my reflection, stepped forward again, and this time its eyes locked with mine. "You've been here before," it said, its voice now impossibly close. The words hit me like a physical blow, cracking through the fog in my brain. "Not as you are now. But you were here, years ago, a century even." I wanted to scream, to tell it that I didn't understand, but the words caught in my throat. I couldn't even remember the last time I had spoken. All I knew was the overwhelming pull of the water, rising, pushing, swirling around me like 1,000 drowning whispers. And then it clicked. I had seen this before. The journal, the old logbook, the stories of the keepers who had vanished, taken by the sea but never truly gone. The sea doesn't just take it, keeps it, binds. A cold realization gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. I wasn't the first. No, I was just the latest in a long line of keepers. A long line of souls who had come to this lighthouse drawn by its light, only to be consumed by the very thing they had sworn to protect it from, the sea. It hadn't just been the storm. It had never been just the storm. It was always the sea. In that instant, I understood. I wasn't standing in the lighthouse anymore. I was sinking beneath it, deeper than any ocean had ever taken me. The sea had long ago claimed this place, and its tendrils were reaching up from the depths, dragging me into its cold embrace. The lighthouse wasn't just a beacon of light, it was a trap, and I had walked right into it. "You see now," the figure said, its smile growing wider. It was no longer me, it never had been, but it knew exactly what I was thinking. It knew the truth. "You'll stay here, with us, forever." The room around me shifted, the walls distorting as the weight of the water bore down. It was no longer just a feeling. I could feel the pressure in my chest, the rush of water flooding every inch of the room. It was suffocating. It was endless. The figure, my reflection, didn't wait for me to make the decision. It reached out, fingers extended, and touched the side of my face with chilling tenderness. The sea is knocking, it whispered, just as it had in the mirror. Then everything went black. I don't know how long I was gone. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. I only knew that when I woke, I wasn't in the lighthouse anymore. I was beneath it. The sea swirled around me, its cold fingers wrapping around my body, pulling me deeper, deeper into the abyss. I opened my mouth to scream, but the water rushed in, filling every crevice, choking off the last of my breath. And then I saw it. The light from the lighthouse, dim but unwavering, cutting through the dark waters above me. But it was no longer a beacon. It was the eye of something vast, watching, waiting. And as I sank deeper, the light flickered and went out. I knew then that the sea had claimed its prize, and I was just another lost keeper. The darkness didn't come at once. It lingered like the slow, inevitable closing of a door, muffled and oppressive. At first, there was just the weight of the water, pulling me down, drowning the last shreds of light. The pressure grew, a crushing, all-encompassing force, but it wasn't the physical strain that suffocated me. It was the realization that I was no longer in control. I was no longer a keeper of the lighthouse. I was a prisoner of something older, something much darker. I had seen the light flicker out, felt the water swallow it whole. But as I sank deeper into the depths, I couldn't shake the image of that lighthouse. The light had gone dark, but I could still hear it. The faint hum, the pulse of the light that had once guided ships safely to shore. It was as if the light had been calling me, pulling me under, dragging me into the abyss. And now, it was as if it was still there, somewhere in the distance, just beyond reach. My thoughts were becoming harder to hold on to. Each breath I took in the water felt thicker, more suffocating, but it wasn't just the water that made it hard to breathe. It was something else, something in the depths. A presence that loomed just beyond my vision, just out of reach, but always there. It was the sea itself reaching out to claim me, just as it had claimed the others before me. I tried to move to fight against the current, but the water was no longer an obstacle. It was a part of me wrapping around me, pulling me down into its depths. My body felt weightless, floating in an endless void. I couldn't see the walls of the lighthouse anymore, but I could still feel its presence, its ghostly echo clinging to me. The sea was knocking, just like the figure had said. I didn't know if it was the sea itself, or if it was something else entirely, but I could hear it, feel it. It was a rhythmic pounding, like a heartbeat, but it wasn't mine. It wasn't human. And then in the darkness, I heard a voice. It wasn't mine. It wasn't the figures. It wasn't even the seas. It was the voice of a keeper who had been here before. "I've waited for you," the voice whispered, low and heavy. "I've watched you just as I've watched all the others. The sea never forgets. It never lets go." The voice faded in and out like the whisper of waves crashing on a distant shore. I couldn't understand it. At first, couldn't make sense of the words. But then they became clear. "It's your turn now," it said. My turn. I wanted to scream, but the water rushed into my throat, choking off every thought, every breath. The voice spoke again, softer now, like a lullaby. "You will be like us. You will be one with the sea." I couldn't understand. I couldn't fathom what it meant, but I felt it deep in my chest. Something ancient, something eternal was wrapping around me, pulling me down, pulling me into the depths. The sea wasn't just water. It wasn't just a body of salt and waves. It was alive in a way I had never understood. And now I was part of it. My thoughts became fractured, splintered, like pieces of a shattered mirror. I remembered the keeper's journal. I remembered the words written in that old log. I remembered the warnings, the strange symbols, the cryptic messages about the sea and its unyielding grip. I had thought it was just superstition. I had thought it was just a story. But now I knew. It wasn't a story. It was a warning. Truth. The sea doesn't just claim lives. It claims souls. And once you've been taken, you are never truly gone. The sea is always waiting, always watching. And no matter how far you try to run, it will always find you. "You're not the first," the voice murmured again. and this time I recognized it. It wasn't the voice of a keeper. It wasn't the voice of the lighthouse. It was my own voice. "I've waited for you." And then the pressure increased. The darkness around me grew heavier, and I could feel myself being drawn into the sea, into its cold, grasping arms. My body was no longer my own. My mind was no longer mine. I had become part of the sea, just as the others had before me. I had become just another lost keeper, another soul bound to the depths. But the worst part was the realization that the sea had been waiting for me all along. It had always known that I would come. And now that I was here, it was never going to let me go. It was never going to let any of us go. The sea was knocking. The pressure was unbearable now. Every inch of my skin felt as if it were being slowly peeled away, the salt water gnawing at my flesh, the currents dragging me deeper, further into the abyss. There was no escape, no breath to fill my lungs, no light to guide me. Just the cold, oppressive weight of the sea closing in from all directions. I tried to focus, tried to remember how I had ended up here, but my thoughts were foggy, disjointed. How long had I been in the water? Hours, days, the passage of time had become a blur, distorted by the waves and the crushing isolation. The lighthouse, the beacon that had once been my purpose. My guiding light was nothing more than a distant memory, now a fading echo lost to the dark. A sudden rush of cold swept through me, and I instinctively tensed. But this wasn't the usual bite of the ocean. It was something else. Something more deliberate, like a hand, a touch reaching for me through the water. I felt the grip around my waist pulling me deeper still, and for the first time, a real fear gripped my chest. Not the fear of the unknown, not the fear of drowning, but the fear of being taken, claimed by something more than the sea itself. I gasped, though the water filled my mouth. My vision was swimming in the darkness, but I could make out shapes, figures moving in the shadows. People, or perhaps their spirits, their eyes gleaming from the depths, their faces twisted in silent agony. They had been here before, just as I had. They had been swallowed by the sea, lost to its depths, just as I was about to be. And now they were watching, waiting. They knew the truth. The sea was no mere body of water. It was a living entity, an ancient, insatiable force that had claimed souls long before I had ever stepped foot on that lighthouse. The log, the warnings, the strange occurrences, it was all real. The sea was alive, feeding on those who came to it, slowly dragging them into its eternal embrace. But there was something more. It wasn't just the sea that was knocking. It was the souls of those who had drowned here, those who had been claimed by the sea, their spirits bound to the lighthouse, to the waters forever. I could hear their voices now, a low murmur, beneath the surface, like whispers in a dream. The sea wasn't just claiming me, it was calling to me, calling to all of us who had been lost here. And I understood in the deepest recesses of my mind that this was how it always was. The sea never let go. It never released its grip on those it had claimed. The drowning wasn't the end, it was the beginning. One by one, the figures rose from the depths, their movements slow, deliberate, like they had all the time in the world. They were not ghosts, not apparitions. They were like me now, part of the sea, part of the darkness that stretched forever beneath the surface. I reached out my hand, trembling, and one of the figures took it, its cold touch sending a shock through me. It was too late to fight, too late to resist. "Welcome home," the figure whispered, its voice, a hollow, echoing sound that reverberated through my bones. "We've been waiting." The sea had claimed me, and now I was part of it. It wasn't a gentle pull, this sinking into the deep. It was a violent, aggressive force that tore at my very being, stripping me of all that I had once known. My flesh, my thoughts, everything was being dragged into the depths, dissolved by the sea's eternal hunger. I could feel myself becoming a part of the darkness, a part of the ocean's endless, hungry void. And yet there was a strange calm that washed over me, like the moment before sleep overtakes you, when you know there's no turning back. The fear was gone. The panic had subsided. All that remained was the understanding that I, too, had become something ancient, something eternal. The sea was knocking, yes, but it wasn't just calling, it was claiming. It always claimed. And I had become just one more part of it. The figures that had surrounded me were vanishing into the blackness, disappearing into the depths, their forms dissolving into the shadows. It was like the sea was erasing them, or perhaps reabsorbing them back into itself. I knew then that I would never be the same. No one who drowned here could ever be the same again. The sea was too old, too powerful. It was a force that didn't care about who you were or where you came from. It didn't care if you were a keeper, a sailor, or a lost traveler seeking refuge. The sea only cared about one thing, taking what it could, dragging it into the deep, where it would be consumed and forgotten. And I had been chosen. I could feel the cold currents pressing against my skin, the weight of the water pulling me deeper into its embrace. But there was no struggle left in me, no fight. I had already been swallowed, my soul claimed my body adrift in the deep. There was nothing left to do but accept it. The knocking of the sea grew louder, now relentless, as if the very ocean itself were pounding on my chest. The pulse of the sea was like a heartbeat, slow and steady, but it wasn't mine. It wasn't human. The sea was knocking, and this time it was knocking for me. As the ocean's pressure tightened around me, something strange began to happen. The knocking, once distant and rhythmic, started to fade, swallowed by an eerie stillness. The sea's heartbeat, the thrum that had filled the depths of my chest, no longer pulsed with urgency. It was as if the sea had grown tired, or perhaps it had already done what it had come for. The figures, those shadowy souls that had surrounded me, were gone, now vanished back into the dark embrace of the abyss. I drifted weightless, suspended between life and death, between worlds. My breath had ceased, yet I still existed, a silent observer in the eternal dark. The sea had claimed me, yes, but in its grasp I felt oddly at peace. There was no pain, no terror. The fear that had once gripped me, that icy hand that had tightened around my heart, was no longer there. In the blackness, I could feel the presence of something ancient, something far older than the lighthouse, than the ships that had sailed these waters, than anything that had ever touched the land. The sea itself seemed to hum with a power beyond understanding. It was a force older than any human could fathom, and now I had become a part of it. The realization hit me with a strange calmness. I was no longer just a man lost in the depths. I was the sea. I was part of its currents, its tides, its endless stretch beneath the surface. The coldness, the darkness, it wasn't suffocating anymore. It was home. A soft whisper echoed through the void, a sound that seemed to emanate from all around me. The sea was speaking again, but this time it was different. There was no malice in its voice, no hunger, only an invitation. It was as if the sea had been waiting patiently for me to understand. It had claimed me, yes, but it wasn't cruel. It wasn't punishing. It was simply accepting. I knew that I could never return to the land, never again see the sun rise over the horizon, or hear the wind carry the sounds of life. But that no longer mattered. I was one with the sea, now part of its eternal rhythm, part of the endless dance of the waves. The log, the warnings, the stories, it was all true. And now I was one of the many who would continue its tale, drifting in the depths, forgotten by time, but never truly gone. The knocking had ceased, but in its place, something else stirred, a quiet, almost imperceptible rumble beneath the surface. The sea wasn't just a body of water anymore. It had become a living, breathing entity, and now it was waking, stretching its limbs into the depths. The souls that had come before me were still there, still lingering in the currents, still part of its great unknowable cycle. The lighthouse was far behind its beam, no longer a guide. But in the distance, I could feel it, the pull of something new, something vast. And though I couldn't see it, I knew in my bones that I wasn't alone. Not now, not ever. The sea was knocking again, but this time I didn't fear it. I welcomed it, and I knew deep in my soul that I always had. It was done. The sea had claimed its prize. But in return, I had found peace. The sea was knocking, and I had answered.